Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to another episode of Danish TV's English language TV channel, the global voice of the Center for Islam and Decoloniality. And it's my great pleasure to have a very dear friend, a dear brother that I had was really blessed to be with when I was in South Africa. Both of us postgraduate students there. Um, in that's in religious studies, but of course, I think the bond between myself and our guest, Mr. Muhammad Khalid Syed, was that there was a deep political impulse within us at the enormous kind of remaining issues of injustices and cruelties around us throughout the world, within the country as well as throughout the world. And so that strong kind of sense, I think, within both of us that bonded us was that whether you're coming from a religious philosophical tradition or a secular one, that strong element of commitment to justice and liberation, I think that really, I think, united both of us, and we would have extensive discussions about these things. And it was just a fascinating time. And I must say that my period there in staying South Africa, uh, Khalid, Khalid, Muhammad Khalid Syed here, our guest, he really made it worthwhile. And it was lots of fun having these discussions with him, learning from him and about South Africa, and which is why I actually wanted to invite him so that our audiences here can also benefit from his vast. Such a young age, mashallah, vast knowledge of kind of the history of that very important def, defining liberation struggle that happened in South Africa, that has been such an inspiration for occupied, oppressed peoples throughout the world today, and has certainly inspired also people within South Africa to continue, and then that includes Khalid himself, to continue that struggle in the midst of the challenges that South Africa faces, that clearly we here in Pakistan face, and so on and so forth, be it the international world capitalist system and so on, and the constraints that places on a lot of the things that we want to do. We know that very well here in Pakistan with the current Prime Minister Imran Khan, and then things that the agenda, the very progressive agenda that he wants to implement, but of course there's a lot of constraints that are often there as well. So, Khalid, welcome to the show. Assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam to you. Should I say Dr. Junaid or Junaid
Yes.
Bhai? Uh, and my greetings also to the viewers. It's a great honor and pleasure to share the platform with you. I mean, you spoke about our time spent together in Cape Town. I must say that I learned a lot from you, particularly, I mean, obviously at the academic level, but also, I mean, because we met at a time when the academy in South Africa was viewed very much as a disengaged space. And I
Right.
think much of what you brought into my own kind of development as a scholar was that I can merge my social political activism outside of the campus space, outside of the classroom, with the academics. So I'm really glad to see what the kind of project that you are running. And I mean, obviously, it has been fascinating. At that time, obviously, I didn't think that Pakistan politically would be where it is now.
Right.
Um, uh, so so
Neither
so
did
so
I.
and neither did you. So it's quite good that we're actually engaging at this particular moment in time. And as a South African, especially a country that has come out of a racist system, and it's still at the stage of transformation, and it's good to also see some of the parallels as well.
Exactly, and no, and of course we're gonna come to that,
mm,
But you hit the nail on the head. Um, it was a time, in the South African Academy, I mean, perhaps even in the Global Academy, in which these types of issues had to be dealt with front hand. That you had these ongoing kind of global injustices, wars, occupations, so on and so forth,
mm,
taking place. And then what was the role of this academic sitting in the ivory tower of the university? Should it be that traditional role of them isolating and separating themselves, perhaps being a quote unquote objective analyst of what's going on? Or should it be what I think that both of us believed in, is that how do you become the knowledge and the ilm that you get, whatever, how do you make that available at the service of actual social movements that are taking
exactly.
place, that are trying to actually advance justice in the world. So I think that both of us were grappling with that, and saw that, in fact, that the role of the public intellectual has to be one that is deeply evolved in these issues, and that is at the service of people and their struggles and their movements for justice. But you're absolutely right. That's, I think, both of us were thinking through
Mm,
these precise issues at that time. So Khalid, let
certainly.
me let me start off, because I think this is, as I was saying earlier, that in not just Pakistan, I don't want to pick on my fellow Pakistanis, but a lot of places around the world, and it does sadden us when other areas of particularly of the global South. I mean, it's like, okay, we don't really care about the global North, but I mean, I'm just saying that jokingly. But particularly within the global South, if if people from the global South uh, don't have that knowledge of that history of the struggles that have taken place,
Mm,
um, be it in South Africa and other places as well. Um, and that's not because of whatever, just okay, born ignorant. It's also because the curriculum and the structures of knowledge that also that we've in our educational systems and so on, they're also coming from a very westernized university,
mm,
westernized academic setting. And so the
mm,
disciplines, and you're probably very much familiar with this, which I mean, I was very much involved in decolonizing our curriculum and so all of this stuff, so that we have some sense of, okay, world history is
mm,
not just a sequential pattern from Plato to NATO, and I mean, and that's pretty much it,
mm,
and nothing else has happened in between. So, and so this has been a very important movement, as a pedagogical movement in compelling us to kind of uh, look at our histories and like reinsert ourselves in some ways
mm,
into the history, which is really inserting ourselves into the present and into the future,
exactly.
in these things. Whereas because of the whole history of colonialism and of the past 500 years, it's kind of been that are the struggles we've had to undergo, the brutalities, the oppressions, the genocides, all of these things to some extent have, I mean, obviously we have fought back, but an erasure has been attempted to take place that we're fighting against.
Mm,
And so,
exactly.
and so, and I think one of the, as I was mentioning to you earlier, is certainly, I mean, from my own reading, from many, I mean, obviously, observers of it, the South African, the Crucible, the of for liberation, that liberation struggle, um,
Mm,
was incredibly inspiring. Not just
mm.
because of Nelson Mandela. We all love the name Nelson Mandela, and in Pakistan, the books are everywhere. Not only because of him, but
Mm,
it was just an incredible movement. And in fact, it is precisely the other than the Nelson Mandela part that I want you to speak about. That what defined the kind of the strength of that movement, um, the the impulse of that movement. What was it up against? What was at the
mm,
apartheid regime that it was
mm,
so vehemently opposed to, that it was involved in all sorts of struggles, building international solidarity, but also obviously directly involved in the struggle within South Africa itself. So if we can just begin with that, what
No,
that struggle was all about.
no, most certainly. Firstly, in order for us to understand what the struggle against apartheid was all about, we need to understand the history of colonialism in South Africa.
Yes.
And the anti-apartheid struggle is intertwined with the struggle against colonialism. So, so already from the 1600s, South Africa was colonized. You had the Dutch colonialists entering, and already then, the nature of colonialism was inextricably linked to capitalism, because the Dutch didn't necessarily enter here as a purely as a state. It was a
Yeah.
state-sponsored company, the Dutch East India Company. And ironically, I'm speaking to you from Cape Town. You've spent your time in Cape Town. Cape Town was where they entered.
Yes.
Jan van Riebeeck in particular. They came as a business entity driven by the state and supported by the state, and a business entity that was fully armed, trying to utilize the Cape initially as a station where in which the traders from the Netherlands, big business traders, could stop, could rest, could cultivate some vegetables, relax. But then gradually they started finding the Cape and South Africa as a whole as a space from which to extract economic riches. So you had Dutch colonialism. And
Right.
as I said,
Which also then went,
colonialism,
which also then continued to go eastward, and then in
e-
Goa, and then in the
yes,
Dutch East Indies and
m-
Indonesia and so on. Yeah.
most certainly. So I think the Pakistani citizens will understand, given
Yeah.
that there was an strong element of Dutch colonialism also in the subcontinent. And it was inextricably linked with extracting uh, 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 um, the raw materials, utilizing the land of South Africa for the benefit of those in Europe.
Yes.
Uh, and there was resistance then already. It's not to say that they came to a place and they were welcome.
Yes.
But the first wars of resistance against the Dutch, that's if I were to root the liberation struggle against apartheid, can be rooted in the first liberation wars against the Dutch by the Khoi in the Cape.
Aha.
Then we had the British entering. So the British, and then obviously there was the slavery as well. Many of our forefathers or forebears came from places such as Indonesia, Java, and they came as political exiles. Many were slaves. There was a struggle against slavery as well. And for Muslims in particular, in fact, Muslims played a major role as the slaves back then already, in terms of resisting the Dutch. But not to say that they didn't also have politics of pragmatism. They also worked with the British to an extent when the British entered, in order to get rid of the Dutch. Hence, you
Oh,
found a
that happened
close
there as
relation.
well. I thought that only happened here.
No, you see, so that's what I'm saying. History is very, very important.
Right.
Uh, but generally, I mean, then when the British entered, uh, the, the struggle against colonialism intensified. There was armed resistance, but it also reached a point. For example, there was the 1913 Land Act. As the white population started to become more indigenous to South Africa and
Right.
born in South Africa, you then had what we call settler colonialism. We weren't yet at the level of apartheid, but eventually it developed into apartheid. It was South African born white people, mainly of Afrikaner descent, as well as British descent, governing the majority of South Africans. But it was very much tied to basically extracting the resources of this country, controlling the economy, controlling the land. And you had, and hence the African National Congress was then formed in 1912, actually, by uh, tribal elders, people who were also well versed in theology, well versed in law. People such as, for example, Saul Plaatje, who had Pixlika Isakaseme, John Dube. These people founded the African National Congress. The focus was then not on an armed resistance, not even civil disobedience. They thought, look, let us write to, because Africa was part of the Commonwealth. It wasn't under British
Right.
occupation, it
Yes.
was under a segregationist government. So they felt, look, let us do petitions to
Yeah.
the monarchy in Britain
Yes.
to see if we can have some reforms of the laws, because black people, ourselves included, all those who were not white, were disenfranchised, couldn't own land, and if you couldn't own land, you couldn't vote. You couldn't determine the political path of the country. So we had this situation, and it's good that you've mentioned Nelson Mandela, and I understand we don't want to make this about Mandela, but
Right.
Nelson Mandela really, and I don't think global media, even when they valorize President Mandela, they don't speak about his role in radicalizing the liberation struggle. They speak about Mandela's role as somebody, yes, who was in prison, who sacrificed and then came out and saw to it that we have a peaceful transition and everybody lives happily ever after, because that's what white South Africans would like to see. And what
Right.
the global imperialist forces would like to see. But the generation of Nelson Mandela, Oliver Reginald Tambo, who led the ANC while Mandela was in prison, Walter Sisulu, one of the great stalwarts of capitalism, Ahmed Kathrada, that particular generation, not, I mean, Ahmed Kathrada was part of the Communist Party, but if I talk about Oliver Tambo, Nelson Mandela, Anton Lembede, even Robert Sobukwe, he eventually founded the PAC. These were kind of a young group within the ANC, while the ANC was writing to the British monarch all the time, appealing against the laws, and when apartheid came in full swing. This young group of revolutionaries who were well educated, uh, they'd grown very, very agitated with the manner in which the senior leadership was dealing with apartheid, was dealing with discrimination, was dealing with settler colonialism. And they then pushed for reform inside of the ANC, and they formed the ANC Youth League, an organization that I've been leading here in my province. They formed the ANC Youth League in 1944. And one of the fundamental issues that they articulated there was that the struggle for liberation is not just one where we as Black people must be allowed to vote, where we must be allowed to go to the same places as white people. No, it's one of economic liberation, getting
Right.
back the key means of production, ownership of the means of production in our economy. That was it's about, taking back the land, but also conducting the struggle in a more radical manner. So they said, no, no, no. We are not going to engage with the colonial masters. We are going to undertake the defiance campaign. So they spoke about the program of action, which first included the defiance campaign, non-violent civil disobedience against the state. And Nelson Mandela was the first volunteer in chief of the defiance campaign. They formed the Youth League as a body to push for leadership change inside of the ANC, that the ANC can have leaders. That time it was President Zuma, not the latest Zuma, but another AB Zuma, Dr. AB Zuma, who was more conservative. They pushed
Right.
for leadership in the ANC to be more attentive to the Youth League. So the Youth League, then young people inside of the ANC, led by Nelson Mandela and Oliver Tambo, that generation, and Winnie Mandela as well, ironically. They then drove a program to radicalize the ANC, to take the apartheid regime head on in a radical manner, and to unite, uh, 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 um, uh, uh, firstly, to start off by uniting Black South Africans, and then moving in even to progressive white South Africans at a later stage. But it was a very radical approach, saying that the struggle is about us. We'll define the nature of the struggle. And eventually, when they saw that civil disobedience was not working, the armed struggle was launched. And it was that generation of the ANC Youth League leaders. They organized themselves. They built structures within the ANC. They made sure that there was young leadership that came. For example, the Mandela generation pushed Walter Sisulu to be the Secretary General of the ANC when he was only, I think, 36 years old. That leadership eventually, even though there was resistance, that leadership eventually launched Umkhonto weSizwe, the military wing of the African National Congress, with Nelson Mandela as the commander-in-chief, where he went for training in
The
places such as
perception,
Algeria, met with the likes of. So what I'm saying is that there was an evolution, and it was young people who drove that armed struggle. Then during the time of the armed struggle, you then started having as well with the ANC. Yes,
Yeah. So
yeah,
the perception is that, of course, Nelson Mandela had nothing, absolutely nothing to do with any form of armed struggle in South Africa, and of course, he was a Gandhian non-violent civil disobedience type of person, and any armed struggle that
totally
ever
wrong.
happened, he would condemn violently and have no part in. Now, what do you say to that?
No, no, no. That is a
Why
complete
do I
fallacy. That is a
both of those?
that's a complete. No, that's a complete fallacy. That's complete Western whitewash propaganda. It's meant to actually dumb us down today. Not to say that we want to take up arms, but it's meant to block us um, from supporting legitimate armed struggles globally. It's meant to dumb us down from taking a radical stance against the current white domination, even of our economy. It's meant to water down the personality of Nelson Mandela. No, Nelson Mandela was the founder of the armed struggle. The reason why Nelson Mandela was arrested and faced and went for the treason trial was because they found him organizing the armed struggle. It was sabotage. Nelson Mandela, even throughout the 1980s, when the armed struggle was at its peak, even here in South Africa, when police stations were being bombed by young people, even, he could have been released because there were liberals that went and said, no, let's have Mandela released. People such as Helen Suzman and others. Mandela said, no, the one condition was he must condemn the armed struggle. He refused. In fact, even when Mandela was released from prison in 1990 in Cape Town, he endorsed the armed struggle. He said, the armed struggle shall continue, even when they were entering negotiations with the apartheid state. So it's not that Mandela dissociated himself from the arms. In fact, the decision for the ANC to temporarily at some stage abandon, and it was temporarily because Mandela and them were aware, they said, if the apartheid state starts to negotiate in bad faith and we are not winning at the negotiation level and it's very difficult, then we can revive the armed struggle. But the decision to abandon the armed struggle was not a Nelson Mandela decision. It was a decision of the collective leadership of the African National Congress. And as you know, revolutionary movements operate at the level of democratic centralism. In fact, it was Chris Hani, who many want to portray then as yes, he was fiber and he was radical, but it was and actually articulated to the masses that we have abandoned the armed struggle for now at a very strategic level. Because you must remember, Junaid, and you will know that at the time when Mandela was released, the Soviet Union and the left bloc was very weakened globally. Much of the military support that the ANC got was from the left axis globally. Even your frontline states on the African continent, where comrades of the ANC were in exile and were launching attacks on the apartheid state, they had entered into agreements with the apartheid government, not willingly so, but to prevent themselves from being bombed and bombarded. Even even Samora Machel, the Nkomati agreement with Mozambique. So the ANC had no other option at that particular time. Obviously, other liberation movements did have an issue, but they also complied in the end. So even if you look at even when Nelson Mandela became president, yes, there was the talk of reconciliation, but at the same time, he always made it clear who the enemy is. And the enemy was characterized as apartheid and those who want to continue the apartheid state quo. So no, Nelson Mandela was not a proponent of civil disobedience. He was not a Gandhi-like leader. Yes, Mahatma Gandhi admired the South African struggle, but he was not a. In fact, let me also add, Junaid, and we can be critical. Nelson Mandela, at a particular stage, even when he was in the Youth League, he even opposed the entry of non-Africans into the ANC. That is why he used to even disrupt meetings of the Communist Party, because he felt through the Communist Party, Europeans are going to enter the ANC space and give it a kind of a Eurocentric flavor. But then he was engaged, obviously, by others and said, no, look, that's not the approach. So, and he evolved, but even till the very end, Nelson Mandela never regretted the Mandela struggle. In fact, that is why we find that even after his retirement, he remained closely linked and related and as a friend with the likes of Fidel Castro, Muammar Gaddafi, Yasser Arafat, and many other revolutionaries.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, Khalid. I want you to you've done an excellent job in giving us the overview of the background coming towards the stage, the peak of the liberation struggle, Mandela being released from prison, and the apartheid regime being forced to its knees to finally engage in some type of
Yes.
accommodation of that liberation struggle and the dismantling of that apartheid regime and the first democratic elections in 1994. So now, in terms of the second half of this interview, I want you to speak briefly about what has happened since then. What has happened since 1994, and what have been some of the ongoing struggles that the African National Congress, other social movements interested in a progressive agenda, moving South Africa forward, addressing the systemic inequities and injustices. What have been some of the movements on these fronts? And I know that you're well positioned. And before you talk about that, I also want you to tell us your own role right now, what you are doing within the ANC in the Western Cape.
No, thank you very much, Junaid Bhai. So my role dual. I'm concluding my term now as the chairperson of the ANC Youth League in the Western Cape Province. But more than that as well, the ANC in the province where I stay is in the official opposition. We are governed by the Democratic Alliance, which still has its roots in the pre-1994 politics of apartheid. So in the opposition benches, I serve as a member of the provincial legislature. In Pakistan, that would be like the state legislature. I'm the deputy chief whip of the ANC. So I play a strategic role in the ANC caucus to give it a sense of political direction. But I also serve as the ANC's representative in the education portfolio. And as you know, education was one of those spheres which the apartheid state used really to dumb down the majority of our population. So it's a real space to drive transformation, to drive a non-racial to drive a non-racial program. And as you know, what kept the liberation movement together and driven was the ANC's vision of a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic South Africa, which means addressing the legacy of apartheid. So in the education space, that's what I try to do, and also in terms of giving strategic direction to the ANC in the legislature, and also building our relations even with civil society movements, even those that are not necessarily ANC inclined, but we can at least share a vision of progressive struggle, Junaid. You wanted me to go into the current challenges that the ANC faces in the country? Okay, so look, I think over there, I want to take us to the level of where we had the negotiated settlement. So 1994 represented very much the political liberation of the majority of South Africans. We had the right to vote, we had the right to access the various, civil liberties were all there. But the control of the economy was not in our hands. I mean, even part of the settlement was that white domination, in a sense, remains untouched in terms of the economic space. So when the 1994 government came in and Nelson Mandela launched the Reconstruction and Development Plan, the program then initially was to say, look, let's focus on the basics. Let's ensure that our people have running water, our people have got access to education, proper healthcare, and that program started. And I think it's continuing, and there are challenges, but lots of great progress has been made. Also ensuring that you can build a strong element of a black middle class in South Africa, which had started and it's still on the trajectory. But the ownership of the means of production and of land was not yet. There were moves during the Mandela administration, the Mbeki administration, the Zuma administration, and even now. But I would say that the big challenge currently is ensuring that there's enough of majority South African ownership of key elements of our economy. We find that the private sector is still very much white dominated. Government also, when it tries as the ANC to implement broad-based black economic empowerment policy, it's often met with resistance. Also, the ANC becomes contested terrain also, where those wishing to control no longer rely purely on the opposition Democratic Alliance, but they will work with elements within the African National Congress to actually water down some of the progressive approaches that we need to take. And out of that frustration, in a sense, the EFF also manages to support. So now, currently, one of the big things we are dealing with is to pass legislation on expropriation of land without compensation, which I think is inextricably linked to the original struggle, which even predates the African National Congress existence. And there's positive movement, but there's lots of resistance. Amongst the other challenges that we do face, yes, so there's a massive resistance on the part of white monopoly capital to, in a sense, share and to allow for transformation. I speak about the Mandela movement, I speak about the 1944 Mandela generation, is I think our generation needs to be among those that drives the African National Congress, that drives South African society in a direction we can be much more forceful and have a greater sense of political will in taking on the skewed ownership patterns. Also, what we have found, Junaid, unfortunately, in the past few years, has been an increase in arrogance and racism on the part of many of our white South African compatriots. Not all of them. There are many who have transformed. There are many who are rooted in the liberation struggle, but there's been an increase in arrogance. That is because, I think, of the slow pace of economic transformation. What explains that for me is the fact that many of them have been successful in resisting state-driven transformation. That then breeds a sense of arrogance in the society level. It plays itself out at schools, plays itself out on the sports field. Recently you've had, the South African cricket team has been in Pakistan. Cricketers that will then get attacked for poor performance of the black cricketers, even though they were shining in terms of performances. So just even at that simplistic level, but it's because there's an arrogance that, you know what, you try to touch what we've wrongfully gained and we are resisting and you can't do anything about it. Also, I think because for a long time now, apartheid era criminals have been operating with a sense of criminal impunity. After the TRT, many have not been charged, so that's the lingering. Also, and here we have to also admit, also there's been, I think, the sins of incumbents, the strong element of corruption that unfortunately many of those even participating in the liberation struggle have been found guilty of and have been implicated. Inefficiency at times on the part of the state in terms of service delivery, then in a sense legitimizes an arrogance on the part of the minority to say, no, it was better under apartheid, even though we know it wasn't. But in the popular, it tends to then give expression to that. So I think
Yes.
there's a variety of factors. And I think, look, we need to make sure that, yes, we lead an ethical struggle. Yes, we call for greater transformation. We build on the gains that have been made. It's completely beyond that and guided by the same ethics that the Mandela generation was guided by.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, this is Khalid. This discussion I want to actually pursue even further. Maybe we can even have a part two on some of the details, which I actually wanted
Yes,
to dig in a bit deeper. But you know how these things work. We don't want to lose our audience. They're not
mm,
gonna. We may be
yes,
having a great time, but I'm not sure if they're gonna stay here for 2 hours to listen to us. But
yes, no,
inshallah, I would love to
certainly,
have you for
certainly.
a part two and a part three and a part four in the future. But Khalid, let me
Inshallah. No,
thank you
definitely.
very
Let's
much.
do some more.
Absolutely.
Thank
And
you
listen,
very
thank
much,
you very
Junaid.
much, Jazakallah, for coming on the show. It was wonderful. Our audience, I'm sure, both in Pakistan and throughout the world, global viewership learned immensely, I think, from your insights today. So thank you, Khalid, for being on the show.
No, Jazakallah to you and to the team and to the audience for listening. And I look forward to more engagements and also hopefully also to get some more insight from you into the current situation in Pakistan. It's a very, very, very exciting time, politically challenging, but also exciting. And I would like to also look at some of the parallels in future. Thank you very much.
Definitely, inshallah. Take care, brother. Okay, assalamu alaikum. Bye
Inshallah.
bye.
Take care.